Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the creation narrative in our continuing study of Old Testament theology. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. When we read that, I believe you're supposed to say to yourself, wait a minute, I've read something like that before. And you say, how can you read something like that before? This is the very first verse in the whole Bible. But if you had lived in the culture in which Moses was, I'm taking him to be the author, in which he lived, there were other writings that were already around at that time. There is a Babylonian creation account known as the Enuma Elish. We'll get to the meaning of that in a second. It's found on 7 tablets, and it tells the story, at least it starts off, with the primeval gods Apsu and Tiamat. He's the husband god, she's the wife god. They're existing as gods, and the story begins when the sky above was not named and the earth beneath did not yet bear a name. When that took place, and the primeval Apsu who begat them, and Chaos, Tiamat, the mother of them both, their waters were mingled together, and no field was formed, no marsh was to be seen. When of the gods none had been called into being, and the story develops now from there. Now, in this account, you have these 2 primeval gods, and then chaos erupts because suddenly they've created some other gods, like the next generation of gods, and that things are way too noisy, and they go to war. Apsu is killed, and Tiamat takes a new husband, Kingu, as her new husband, and then Marduk, one of those up-and-coming gods, fights Tiamat and uses her corpse to fashion the earth and the sky. Next, we read about Marduk killing Kingu, the stand-in husband, the new husband, and then creates man from his blood. Finally, Sabbatu is established as an ordinance, which refers not to the Sabbath, but to the full moon that appears once a month. Now, as we look at that story and put the Genesis account, I've just put the opening couple of verses of the Genesis account side by side, we notice an interesting parallel. Yes, they are different, but there are some amazing similarities in just the format. The Enuma Elish starts off, when in the height heaven was not named, and the earth beneath did not yet bear a name. The heaven or the sky, Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 starts off, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Notice they both begin right off the bat speaking of the heaven and the earth. And then in the Enuma Elish we have the primeval Apsu who begat them. In the Genesis account, it's how God created. You could say he begat, he created the heavens and the earth. In the Enuma Elish, next we read of the Chaos, and Chaos, Tiamat, the mother of them both. In the Genesis account, we have the earth was without form and void. That's rather chaotic. In the Enuma Elish, next their waters were mingled together. In the Genesis account, Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, we have darkness on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving on the face of the waters. So notice the chaos and the waters. This is described in both accounts. The Enuma Elish, in that story, Tiamat engulfs the world in a primal chaos. In the Genesis account, the world is unformed and unfilled, rather chaotic. In the Enuma Elish, light comes from the gods. In Genesis, God brings light into existence. That's in verse 3. God says, let there be light, and there is light. In the Enuma Elish, Marduk makes the stars of the zodiac and ordains the year. In the Genesis account, it is God who sets the sun and moon for signs, for seasons, for days, and for years. But notice, it's mentioned. That's not something you had to mention, but it is. In the Enuma Elish, Marduk makes man from the blood of Kingu. In the Genesis account, God creates man in his own image and likeness. So there's differences, but notice the same topics mentioned throughout. The Enuma Elish, we have Marduk commanding the horns to determine 6 days, the 7th day to divide the crown, and then the 14th day to be the Sabbatu. That's that time of the month when the moon is full. And so it's not the same as the Sabbath, but Genesis does talk about the Sabbath, where God creates in 6 days and rests on the 7th day, which he appoints as the Sabbath. So even the idea of a memorial day is mentioned in both accounts. You see, 2 authors do not independently express thought alike. And that means there is a correlation between the Enuma Elish and the Genesis account. I want to suggest that it is a deliberate correlation, not just by chance, that it is deliberate, that Moses was aware of the Enuma Elish, and that Moses is giving to us a refutation of the accepted mythos that was held in antiquity as he goes point by point to show that God is the true creator of heaven and earth. He is using that as his pattern to tell us the story, how God is the one who is the real creator, not this story of Apsu and these pagan gods.